You know, as Thomas Paine opined in 1776, these are the times that try men's souls. You are viewing Issues and Answers on the WCEG Network. I am your host, Norman A. Carter Jr., and my goal, as always, is to enlighten your perspectives about our environment, our socio-political struggles, and those banes of classism and racism that make all of our lives more difficult than they should be. And so doing, our hope here at WCEG is to bring all of us together in a human tapestry of brotherhood and sisterhood, bound together by threads of understanding, respect, and tolerance of our physical, racial, and religious differences. And hopefully, we can have a discussion of ideas based on facts, not fiction, that will encourage us to think critically and not emotionally. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The words of 19th century Unitarian minister Theodore Parker. There is hope, ladies and gentlemen. There is hope. If you are currently watching, we thank you. But inform your neighbors and friends and associates that we can be viewed via YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and over streaming devices such as Roku. Our podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and JioSaavn platforms. All of our programs are archived on YouTube and can be viewed by anyone at any time. And please understand the topics and opinions on Issues and Answers are those of the host, moi, and not the WCEG network. So let's get moving on this installment of Issues and Answers. The title of our program today is, are we making history or repeating history? Is past prologue. Are we making history or repeating history? Is past prologue. You know, I want to begin today about those who sacrifice their lives so that we can sit back and enjoy that which has been dubbed the sweet science. There is nothing sweet about the sweet science. We enjoy seeing men and women being knocked unconscious. We ignore the fact that each knockout is the result of a blow or series of blows that short circuit the electrical impulses in someone's brain. Each blow to the head or body can result in a brain or body bruise. By definition, bruises are internal bleeding. Think about bleeding in your brain. But we enjoy that. Billions of dollars are spent on watching these modern day gladiators inflict injury on one another. Our enjoyment and their sacrifices come with consequences. They don't have long lives. Joe Louis dead at 67 years. Muhammad Ali dead at 74 years. Joe Frazier dead at 67 years. Roberto Duran dead at 73 years. Johnny Tap Tap Tapia dead 45 years old. Arturo Gatti dead 37 years old. George Foreman dead this weekend at 76 years old. We view ourselves as having evolved from the days of Roman gladiators, but there remains a part of us that still enjoys violence and bloodshed. May all of these gladiators rest in peace, and may we all appreciate their sacrifices for our entertainment. As we get into the meat of our program today, I do want to thank Reverend Joseph Flint for his inspiration. for my putting together this broadcast. You may know Reverend Flint as one of the producers and broadcasters here on WCEG Network. And I was sort of in a, there's so much going on in the world today, and I was having trouble uh, all through last week and this weekend and putting together a cohesive program that might be entertaining and educational. I needed a theme. And you know, after speaking to someone who I truly admire for her accomplishments in the field of communication and religion, and received information about a sermon that Reverend Joseph Flint gave yesterday, that put me on in line with what I wanted to do for you today. So I just wanted to give kudos to him, and let me begin. And I will begin by first saying that this is an important reminder for everybody. My goal is not to make any of you angry. My goal is to impart truth and arouse a sense of intellectual curiosity that will inspire you to become critical thinkers rather than emotional reactionaries. I get a lot of that. It is due to a lack of critical thinking by millions that we are plagued with leaders more concerned with being historical figures, driving us into hysteria, and career politicians than they are in serving well the citizens of this country. Career politicians, think about this the next time you vote. Career politicians are a weighty yoke around the neck of America. So, friends, do not become angry. Become active. Be a thinker. And don't hate people just because you disagree with them. You can dislike people for what they do, but because you disagree with them, that's where we are today in America. That's where we are. Never in the history of America has this been this type of hatred between Democrats hating Republicans, Republicans hating Democrats, everybody hating libertarians, and nobody getting nowhere. And that's just not my opinion. The last Congress, the last seated Congress, got the fewest number of bills enacted than any Congress since the Depression. Think about that. Think about that. These are the people you elected. A bunch of angry people going nowhere. Okay, let's get with it. I'm going to begin by reading the Living Tree version of the Holy Scriptures, Genesis 3, verses 1 to 4. Bear with me. Genesis 3, 1 to 4. But the serpent was shrewder than any animal of the field that Adonai Elohim made. So it said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from all the trees in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, of the fruit of the trees we may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God said, we must not eat of it, and you must not touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you most assuredly won't die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, most of you know the rest of the story, that the serpent gave the woman enough truth to make her disobey God's commandment. And because of her bad decision, she, her husband, and all future generations of humans would suffer hardships, illness, and even death. Bad decisions have consequences. I don't normally promote my autobiography, but I have to speak on it today because it fits the situation. In my autobiography, The Long Blue Walk, The Long Blue Walk, The Long Blue Walk, my journey as a Philly cop, I write about my experience with a police captain whom I had helped to train when he was a rookie police officer. In the chapter, They'll Never, Ever Learn, I tell this story. I was working in my operations room when this captain, who was assigned to night command, came into my district to obtain gas for his patrol vehicle. After we exchanged pleasantries, he joyfully informed me that he was being assigned to command the 5th Police District in Philadelphia. I was joyful at his receiving this new and important assignment. But this was the district where I was forced to leave for my own safety after reporting and documenting blatant corruption by several officers, supervisors, and even the commanding officer. The Police Internal Affairs Bureau and likely high-ranking officials, including the mayor, were more concerned about silencing me than they were concerned about ridding the department of police officers and officials who were committing and covering up serious crimes. So I felt obligated to warn that captain, whom I knew and respected. I asked to speak with him privately. I warned him about the conditions in that police district, as it had not been that long since I was transferred from there. I knew police officers who still worked in that district, and criminalized police officers were still engaged in the same behavior that I had reported. The captain thanked me. He thanked me for giving him this information. And within 2 years, this captain was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for engaging in the same activities with the same officers I had warned him about. Bad decisions have consequences. You get the full story if you ever pick up my book. It's available on Amazon.com. The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop. Okay? Um, I am sure that this man sat in his prison cell, that as he sat there, he remembered over and over the warning I had given him. You see, because he lost everything. He lost his job. He lost his pension. Probably lost his home. But what did his family do? What could his family do? He remembered the warning that I've given him. No doubt in my mind. Yet he chose to disregard that alluring tree of deceit and corruption. Bad decisions have consequences. Just a reminder, you are viewing Issues and Answers on the WCEG Network. The opinions are my own and do not reflect the beliefs or opinions of the management of this network. Now, in my home city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there is a radical back to nature group known as MOVE, MOVE, all in capital letters. Okay, let's get to the truth. This is not composed of civil rights protesters. They are not and were not a Black liberation group. That's what you see when you look them up online. They are not that. And so many history rewriters are engaging in this lie, telling that this group of people are something that we should feel honored about. when they wind up being a bunch, in my opinion, of disgraceful people bent on just totally disrupting the society in which we live. You'll find out later as I go on. They are at best urban terrorists. At best, they're urban terrorists. Skilled at gaining public sympathy, shrewd, even while having a reputation of being the catalyst for destruction of one neighborhood and seriously damaging another neighborhood. Let me give you folks on a national in the nation and the world a snapshot of what this group did that some folks refer to as the Black Liberation Group or civil rights protesters. Now, initially, they organized and inveigled themselves to neighbors while living in a house near 34th and Pearl Street in Philadelphia. First, they set up as lovers of wild animals and organized car washes. Soon, they converted this house that they lived in into a compound surrounded by a wooden fence with reinforced doors and with a cache of weapons. 24 hours a day, they blared, excuse me, profane vitriol via megaphones in this area that was highly populated by college students and college staff. Imagine that, night and day, hearing someone yelling and screaming profanity over a megaphone. Imagine that. The neighbors, angry, met with government leaders and police executives, alleging this group to be a public nuisance and demanding their arrest and removal. They were living in a rented home. After a standoff lasting months, I was there, that was facilitated by well-meaning politicians, they should have stayed out of it, an attempt was made to arrest the occupants of the building. In that attempt, a police officer was killed. Occupants were arrested. The building was torn down. But the neighbors of the Cobbs Creek neighborhood, which is northwest of that location, decided to embrace MOVE members MOVE members who were not arrested and give them sanctuary in their neighborhood. After endearing themselves to the neighborhood, they began to fortify their house and hold 24 hours a day megaphone speeches about perceived ills and threats to neighbors and police while living in relative filth in this congested area of row homes. The neighbors protested for months. At one point, a block captain stated during a televised interview on KYW TV in Philadelphia that if the police did not remove the MOVE members, the neighbors would burn down the house themselves. If the police did not remove the MOVE members, the neighbors would burn down the house themselves. They would burn them out. Insanity. So eventually, arrest warrants were obtained for the residents of the MOVE compound. The members of this compound used children as shields when walking to stores or when walking to bathe their children in the polluted stream called Cobbs Creek. You see, they figured if you walk outside, with your children all around you, then the police are not going to arrest you because police don't want to shock the children. And that worked. It worked. I remember being on a detail out there and seeing them walking down the street with the 5 and 6 children around them and saying to myself, why don't we just go arrest them? Just arrest them. Put the kids with defects, we didn't have defects, but child services, and be done with it. But that was not done. It could have been done peacefully, but it wasn't. Now, concurrent concurrent with these events, a new mayor, Wilson Good, was elected. Now, at that time, the city was in a budget crisis, and it was necessary to take aggressive steps to keep the city viable. Now, cuts had to be made, and among those cuts would be layoffs of newly sworn in members of the Philadelphia police and fire departments. Now, this was met with outrage by the bargaining agents for both departments. The outrage led to death threats targeting the mayor and his security team. Now, his security team were police officers. Imagine. As a result, when the decision was made to arrest members of MOVE in this congested residential neighborhood, the mayor was prohibited from being on site for safety reasons. As arrests were attempted, a day-long gun battle erupted and between MOVE members and the police. At dusk, a police commander decided that it would be a good idea to drop a packet of C4 explosives from a helicopter atop the roof of the MOVE house to force them out. Keep in mind, the day before, MOVE members had soaked all the roofs with gasoline. Everybody knew that. So the bomb was dropped, and that caused a fire that quickly spread to nearby homes. The police commander, Gregor Sambor, ordered the fire department to stand down and to, quote, let the fire burn, end quote. This was an attempt to force out the armed MOVE members. Now, the majority of the MOVE members decided to become martyrs. Adults and children died. An entire neighborhood was consumed by this conflagration. This was the result of a bad decision to embrace a group that had a reputation for disruption and violence. But to this day, they are embraced by many in Philadelphia, while Philadelphians vilify the former mayor for not being at the scene where there was a serious chance of his being assassinated. That's insanity. But you know what? It's, again, shrewdness on the part of the villains in charming the public, just as Eve was charmed by the serpent. Let's move on. From 1920 to 1948, Palestine was under control of the British government. Now, let's ignore how this came to be because it's a long story. But from the late 30s until 1945, Germany embarked on the industrialized murder of millions of Jews in Germany and Europe. Many Jews seeking asylum in other countries were turned away. These countries included the United States. In 1947, the United Nations adopted a resolution partitioning Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. The plan was accepted by the Jewish community, but rejected by the Arabs. This led to the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. That portion of Palestine, partitioned for the Jewish community, was renamed Israel. Now, for the next 77 years, this area has been involved in conflicts and terrorist attacks instituted by both sides. Now, in 2007, the Arab portion occupied by Palestinians voted to be governed by a terrorist group known as Hamas. Hamas in Palestine, move in Philadelphia. The prevailing purpose of this group is the total destruction of Israel. On October 7th, 2023, this group and its affiliates organized an invasion into Israel that targeted its civilian population, not the military population, but civilian population. Nearly 1,200 civilians were murdered. Many women were raped and then murdered. Scores of hostages were taken back to Hamas-controlled areas along the Gaza Strip. This led to a shooting war that continues to this date. Over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed. Over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed. More Palestinians and Israelis will die. All of this occurred due to a poorly implemented partitioning of Palestine due to decisions not to accept Jewish refugees fleeing murderous anti-Semitism in Europe and Israel's retaliation and Israel's retaliation for a murderous incursion by terrorists that Palestine embraced. Bad decisions all around. Think about it. The forbidden fruits of selfishness and power always lead to bad ends. To quote that chapter of my autobiography, they'll never, ever learn. You are listening to and viewing Issues and Answers on the WCEG Network. The opinions expressed on this program are mine alone and not the opinions of staff or management of WCEG Talk Radio. Now, you are invited to text in your comments and questions by viewing us on Facebook. Your opinions matter. No one on earth has patented rightness. All of us err, even me. That's why there's a famous verse in the Judeo-Christian Bible which says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us." You see, purity is something that humans just don't have. Rightness to the extreme is something, a quality that Americans do not possess. So I invite your opinions. You are allowed to disagree with me, and I will embrace the conversation. All you have to do is text in your questions and comments via Facebook. We'll answer them as quickly as possible and as honestly as possible. And when we don't know the answer, we'll tell you. We'll tell you. Let's move on. Roland Martin, we all know him, and other egotistical pundits encouraged millions to boycott viewing the inauguration of Donald Trump and his State of the Union speech. The end result of this misguided and meaningless protest was to keep those millions of followers ignorant of the inspirations and intentions of the newly minted Republican Party, led by a maniacal narcissist who surrounds himself with obsequious jellyfish because when he flies into adolescent tantrums when anyone disagrees with him. So he needs obsequious jellyfish around him. He runs the government as if it is a private enterprise solely accountable to him. He runs the government. He is, he's, for one of a better example, he's like King George. King George ran the government in Britain like that. Mussolini did that. Hitler did that. Putin does that. Kim Jong Un does that. Now, supposedly, our United States Constitution was written to prohibit this type of autocracy. But the precepts of that Constitution are gradually being eroded due to a corrupt Supreme Court and spineless career legislators. Spineless career legislators in the US Senate, in the US Congress. Think about that. And I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans. Spineless. But let's get back to the inauguration speech that many of you were encouraged to boycott. Firstly, as I have mentioned several times on this program, Donald Trump's presidential idol is former President Andrew Jackson. If you know the history of Andrew Jackson and place it against the actions of Trump, you will find many similarities. Andrew Jackson served as president from 1829 to 1837. Listen to this story. American settlers have been pressuring the federal government to remove Indians. I hate calling them that, but that's what they called them at that time, to remove Indians from the Southeast. Many settlers were encroaching on Indian lands, while others wanted more land available to the settlers. Although the effort was vehemently opposed by some, like U.S. Congressman Davy Crockett of Tennessee. Y'all all know Davy Crockett, right? President Andrew Jackson was able to gain congressional passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which authorized the government to extinguish any Indian title to land claims in the Southeast United States. To extinguish any Indian title to land claims in the Southeast. Now, that word extinguish bothers me. Remember the last Issues and Answers program? I talked about someone on Facebook talking about obliterate Democrats. This is the same type of hatred. Extinguish. Now, this mandate from Andrew Jackson was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against the relocation of the indigenous inhabitants of Southeast America. President Andrew Jackson defied that order. His statement was, the Supreme Court has made its decision. Now let them enforce it. The Supreme Court has made its decision. Now let them enforce it. Does that sound familiar? Just as Andrew Jackson, Trump has embraced manifest destiny. He said that at his inauguration. Remember that the original proponents, those of you who know history, the original proponents of manifest destiny believed that America should expand its territory to include all of Canada and all of Mexico. Donald Trump has voiced that same intention. Are we making history or repeating history? Is past prologue? Trump adds that not only Mexico and Canada, but also Panama and Greenland. Is he a modern day Genghis Khan? Are we making history or just repeating history? Now, for decades, there was decades of calling George Armstrong Custer a hero. But you know, that ended when a century of deception fell to the truth that he was an arrogant, murderous leader who killed unarmed women and children. In retaliation, he and his troops were slaughtered by indigenous tribes led by the Sioux Nation. Let's not forget that Donald Trump's, each of Donald Trump's electoral wins were against a woman. Each of Donald Trump's electoral wins were against women. Now, it's odd that this man who has bragged about sexually assaulting women cohabited with a porn star while his wife was pregnant and publicly called Vice President Kamala Harris a bitch, is embraced by millions of men and women. Let us not forget that this is the same man who made false allegations about former President Barack Obama. Let us not forget that he was in the midst of false allegations that Hillary Clinton committed criminal acts, even though two Republican-led investigations found no wrongdoing. Yet throughout his first presidential campaign, he led cries of lock her up, lock her up. He called former President Joe Biden Crooked Joe, even though he is the only convicted felon to ever be elected president of the United States. But the serpent was shrewder than any animal of the field that Adonai Elohim made. America has made decisions very similar to that woman in the Garden of Eden. Bad decisions based on shrewd deceptions. Neither the woman in the garden nor America escaped the consequences of their bad decisions. Let's not forget the end result of manifest destiny. America took lands that were inhabited for centuries by those who were mistakenly called Indians. They were not from India. America took from Mexico an area originally called Tejas, now called Texas, and New Mexico, and California. Now, the annexation of Texas in 1845 stands as one of the most pivotal moments in 19th century American history. Not only did it significantly alter this nation's geographic boundaries, but it also raised critical questions about national identity and the expansion of slavery. You see, initially, those Americans who settled in Mexico's Tejas region brought slaves with them, brought slaves with them. But Mexico had outlawed slavery in 1829. How about all of that for all you folks who hate Mexico? Mexico outlawed slavery in 1829. This placed those Americans in conflict with the Mexican government. Those in the Tejas region rebelled against the Mexican government. Now, with the help of American troops, Mexico lost that war, and Tejas became its own independent republic. Only later would it be annexed and become part of the United States. So that's why today you see that the Texas flag is a lone star for the Lone Star State in remembrance that it was once an independent republic and not part of the United States or Mexico. It was an independent republic, thus its lone star. The American fighters at the Alamo might be American heroes, but to the Mexicans, they were terrorists, occupying a land they did not own. Think about that. Now, Donald Trump's egotistical renaming of the Gulf of Mexico is as Jacksonian as the forced Trail of Tears death march that not only resulted in the deaths of the indigenous inhabitants of Southeast America, but also the African slaves and African wives who lived with them. Today, we are deporting alleged illegal immigrants without due process of law and sending them to El Salvador, which is known for its inhumane treatment of prisoners. Its dictator embraces Trump as a friend. He enjoys his notoriety. But remember how Americans and immigrants of Latino heritage boastfully supported Trump's immigration policy? Do you remember that? I do. They felt secure. Do they feel secure now? No due process, no investigation, deportation without adjudication. Is this what you really wanted? Did you go for the shrewd deception and pluck from that forbidden tree? Are you laughing now? First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the Latinos, and I did not speak out because I was not a Latino. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. The words of Martin Niemöller with a little addition by Norman Carter. You are listening to and viewing Issues and Answers on the WCEG Network. The opinions expressed on this program are mine alone and not the opinions of staff or management of WCEG Talk Radio. Now, you are invited to text in your comments and questions by viewing us on Facebook. Your opinions matter. Now, you Black Republicans especially that little group we have here in Georgia. You need to stop grinning. Your ancestors are already being erased from American history. Jackie Robinson, he was not only a highly successful baseball player who became the first African American to be allowed to play Major League Baseball, he went on to become a successful businessman. But before those hallmark successes, Robinson was drafted into military service during World War II, but was court martialed for refusing to sit at the back of a segregated Army bus. Eventually, he was cleared and was honorably discharged. Last week, these accomplishments were removed from the Department of Defense's website. This was done at the same time mentions of Tuskegee Airmen, Rosa Parks, and the incarceration of thousands of Japanese Americans during World War II were removed. After public outrage, the government, under the direction of presidential human hammer Elon Musk, stated this was an unfortunate error, and these and other events citing people of color were replaced. Accident? This was all part of an initiative to erase from history America's despicable treatment of indigenous Americans, African slaves, and their African American descendants and Japanese Americans. In addition, this initiative includes the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in government, private businesses, and education. These are all part of Project 2025, which was a manifesto drafted by Trump appointees that he denied knowledge of throughout his campaign. Just like the serpent in the garden, Donald Trump is a liar. Trump has destroyed the Department of Education. It was that department tasked with ensuring that all Americans have the opportunity to receive a good and equitable education that will prepare them to enjoy productive and fruitful employment. Now we have reverted to individual states making decisions about education. Our young millennials, I'm talking to y'all. You don't listen to us, folks, but I'm talking to you anyway. Our young millennials who heavily supported Trump's election are ignorant of the fact that this is the regressive states' rights movement that legislated segregated schools, segregated housing, and segregated access to government services and employment in government and private businesses. These millennials who disdain women, they hate women in authority, are ignorant of the history and opted to join a regressive movement that kept many of their grandparents and other ancestors shackled in poverty. It was only through legislation such as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the establishment of a Department of Education that allowed these young folks to rise to the pinnacle of malignant, self-defeating snobbery. We are gradually moving towards a time when Article 4 of the United States Constitution will become irrelevant and states will become independent governments immune from federal laws. That's chaos, folks. That's chaos. But that's what millennials and racists voted for, and that's why Donald Trump is in office. Y'all did it. And you folks, you don't remember history and you hate history. Here are the words of Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Number one, about the capitalist states, that's us. It doesn't depend on you whether or not we exist. Talking about his country, Russia. If you don't like us, don't accept our invitations and don't invite us to come and see you. But whether you like it or not, history is on our side. We will bury you. Can you hear Vladimir Putin saying this? He certainly believes it. Now, secondly, quote from Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev. And you need to pay attention to this, America, because this isn't repeated anywhere, and it's not repeated on major media, but you're hearing it here on WCEG Talk Radio. Nikita Khrushchev said this: the John Birch Society is communism's greatest ally. With its help, we will divide and confuse the American people until they have lost faith in their government. Their nation has ceased to be a major world power, and their country is ripe for revolution. I got to repeat that. I got to repeat that because this is not on major media. You will never hear it on major media, but you're hearing it here. So I'm going to repeat it. Nikita Khrushchev stated the John Birch Society is communism's greatest ally. With its help, we will divide and confuse the American people until they have lost faith in their government. Their nation has ceased to be a major world power, and their country is ripe for revolution. He said this around 1958, folks. Nikita Khrushchev. Now, for those of you who are not up to date on current events, and I've talked about this group before, the John Birch Society is at the core of this new Republican movement. Donald Trump is just a figurehead. The real power lies behind him. I have spoken about the John Birch Society before. They work hard at staying in the background. Have you forgotten that I told you about a Georgia congressman who in 2021 became their Man of the Year? He was awarded this honor at a hotel in Duluth, Georgia. The John Birch Society insisted that no signage be erected announcing their presence. They insisted that at their banquet, that all staff be American citizens. In addition, they insisted that no African American staff be on their banquet floor. This is not something I heard. I was there as an employee. The John Birch Society is real, and it is led by rich and powerful people. Ignore them at your own peril. You're not going to hear one of these black pundits talk about John Birch because they're not that educated. They really don't care. They don't want to educate you. They just want to entertain you and have you running off and doing dumb stuff like not watching the inauguration or not watching State of the Union. Stupid, meaningless. Again, I ask, are we making history or repeating history? Is past prologue? Are we still relying on shrewd serpents tempting us with trees bearing bad fruit, we must do better. But better only comes when we begin to think about the consequences of our actions before we take those first steps towards that which is actually a tree of death masquerading as a tree of life. This has been Issues and Answers from the WCEG Network. Stay safe, be smart, and remember, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. I thank you for listening to us today and hope we'll see you again in 2 weeks, right here on the WCEG Network. Peace out.